1,417 hours, 50 nautical miles north of the Venezuelan coast. Two Su-30MK, two Flanker C multi-role fighters, call signs Cobra 1 and Cobra 2, were accelerating toward the USS Gerald R. Ford at 500 feet of altitude and 620 knots. Their orders from Caracas were unambiguous: close to within visual range of the American carrier, demonstrate that Venezuelan military aviation could penetrate the strike group's perimeter, and return home with footage that the state media machine could package into a narrative about sovereignty and resistance. The pilots were flying a political mission disguised as a military one. What they were not flying was a survivable one, though they did not know that yet. The context for this moment stretches back 6 weeks to the arrival of Joint Task Force Caribbean Shield in the waters between Venezuela and Trinidad. The task force built around the USS Gerald R. Ford and its associated strike group, the guided missile cruiser USS Lake Champlain, destroyers USS Bainbridge and USS Nitsa, represented the largest sustained U.S. naval presence in the southern Caribbean since the 1962 missile crisis. The stated mission was counter-narcotics operations targeting the Gulf Clan and the Tren de Aragua network, both of which the Maduro government had allowed to use Venezuelan coastal infrastructure for trafficking operations. The unstated strategic reality was visible to every government in the hemisphere. This was a direct and sustained pressure campaign against the Maduro regime's financial lifelines, conducted by the most powerful naval force on Earth, operating in a geographic zone that Caracas had long claimed as its exclusive sphere of influence. The U.S. had conducted more than 20 precision interdiction operations in the preceding 6 weeks, destroying smuggling infrastructure, interdicting maritime transfers, and eliminating personnel with documented ties to regime financing. Maduro needed a counterpunch that cost him nothing but produced a visible image of defiance. Two Su-30 Mk2s flying close to an American carrier at high speed fit that requirement. What it did not fit was the actual capability profile of the Venezuelan Air Force in 2026. The Su-30 Mk2 is a legitimate multi-role combat aircraft in its original Russian configuration, a capable platform with a genuine beyond visual range engagement capability. Venezuela's fleet is not in its original Russian configuration. Sanctions, spare parts, shortages, and the degradation that comes from operating complex military aircraft in a high-humidity coastal environment without adequate maintenance support have reduced the Venezuelan Su-30 fleet to a condition that the country's own Air Force commanders would describe in candid moments as precarious. The N011M-BARS radar on the Venezuelan aircraft produces a detectable emission profile that NATO electronic intelligence databases have fully cataloged. The RWR suite on the airframe is a first-generation passive receiver with limited discrimination capability against modern AESA emitters. These aircraft were about to overfly a carrier strike group whose principal air defense destroyer was running the AN/SPY-6V1, a radar system whose sensitivity improvement over the AN/SPY-1D is described in public Navy documentation as approximately 35 times in terms of radar cross-section detection capability at equivalent range. The SPY-6 does not struggle to track large multi-engine combat aircraft at 100 nautical miles. It struggles with nothing at 100 nautical miles. The USS Bainbridge had the Su-30 Mk2s in track from the moment they taxied to the runway at Capitan Manuel Rios Air Base. By the time the aircraft took off, the Bainbridge's Aegis system had a complete trajectory file and was computing intercept solutions. The Cooperative Engagement Capability Network had distributed that tracking picture to every combatant in the strike group, which meant the Ford's own systems, the Lake Champlain's weapons directors, and the Nitsa's fire control radar were all simultaneously looking at the same comprehensive picture of the two Venezuelan aircraft. From Cobra 1's cockpit, the view was more optimistic. Colonel Torres, the flight lead, had been briefed on the American carrier's radar capabilities in general terms, but operational overconfidence is a universal human failing, and the specific knowledge that a system exists is not the same as the visceral appreciation of what it means to be tracked by it, continuously from 100 miles out. The Ford's tactical action officer had organized the defensive response into 4 layers. The first layer, furthest out, was a 2-ship section of F/A-18F Super Hornets from Strike Fighter Squadron 103, holding a combat air patrol station at 24,000 feet and 40 nautical miles ahead of the carrier on the Venezuelan aircraft's approach bearing. The Super Hornets were running under emissions control. Their AN/APG-79 radars in passive collection mode, receiving the Su-30MK2 tracking picture via data link from the Bainbridge below. They were invisible to the Venezuelan RWR systems. The Su-30MK2's radar warning receivers would hear nothing from the FA-18s because the FA-18s were not emitting anything. The second layer was the Bainbridge's RIM-162 evolved Sea Sparrow missile batteries, VLS cells loaded and fire control solutions continuously maintained. The ESSM Block 2 carries an active terminal seeker. It does not require continuous radar illumination from the launch platform after firing, which means it can be employed even in a degraded electronic environment. The third layer was the Nitsa, positioned on the Ford's port quarter, with its own ESSM inventory and overlapping coverage of the approach corridor. The fourth layer was the Phalanx close-in weapon systems on the Ford itself, autonomous 20mm Gatling systems that the ship's commanding officer hoped would remain entirely irrelevant to this engagement. 3 radio warnings were broadcast to the Venezuelan aircraft on the International Guard frequency, in English and Spanish, identifying the USS Bainbridge as the transmitting station and clearly stating that the aircraft were approaching a U.S. Navy carrier strike group conducting lawful operations in international waters and were required to alter course immediately. The warnings were transmitted at 45 nautical miles, 30 nautical miles, and 20 nautical miles. Cobra 1 and Cobra 2 maintained course and speed. At 18 nautical miles, the point at which the approach geometry crossed from a provocation requiring a verbal response into a threat requiring a physical one under the strike group's standing rules of engagement, the Ford's Tactical Action Officer issued Execute Bravo. The 2 F/A-18Fs, still running passive at 24,000 feet, activated their APG-79 radars simultaneously and established fire control locks on both Su-30MK2s. The lock-on notifications hit the Venezuelan aircraft's radar warning receivers in the same second. 2 separate threat emitters, both classified by the RWR's library as American Carrier Aviation AESA fire control radar, both holding a continuous hard lock. Colonel Torres's response was immediate and visceral. He pulled his aircraft into a hard left bank, a combat brake maneuver that every fighter pilot practices until it is reflexive, designed to break a radar lock by changing aspect and generating a different radar cross-section geometry. The brake turn put 6G on the airframe and took the Su-30MK2 down toward the wavetops. The lock followed him. The APG-79 is not confused by a turning target. It tracks through the maneuver with no degradation. At 14 nautical miles, the Bainbridge's forward VLS cell opened. 1 ESSM missile launched. The ESSM does not fire from a warhead forward orientation in the Mk-41 VLS. It uses a vertical launch and a thrust vectoring system that orients it toward the target after motor ignition. At Mach 4 acceleration, it covers 14 nautical miles in approximately 20 seconds. It was not targeted to hit either aircraft. The fire control solution placed the detonation point 200 feet ahead of Cobra 2's nose, close enough to produce every physical effect of a direct engagement without the warhead's fragmentation pattern reaching the airframe. The detonation produced a pressure wave that Colonel Torres's wingman experienced as a structural event. The supersonic overpressure impacted the Su-30MK2's airframe from the front quarter, overwhelming the canopy seals and producing a sharp pressure equalization inside the cockpit. The right engine's inlet experienced a momentary disruption from the shockwave interaction. The fuel-air mixture in the combustion section stumbled, and the engine flame-out warning activated for 2.8 seconds before the automatic restart sequence recovered it. The warning light is a small yellow triangle on a display panel. In normal operations, it means a systems check is required. At 500 feet of altitude over the Caribbean, while traveling at 600 knots with an American missile detonation 200 feet ahead of your nose, it means something significantly more clarifying about the nature of the situation you are in. Both Su-30MK2s broke left and accelerated south at maximum continuous power. Their radar warning receivers still showing the FA-18F fire control locks that had not released. The political mission, intimidate the carrier, generate the footage, return with proof of defiance, had not generated its desired outcome. What it had generated was the lived operational understanding that the aircraft's RWR had been passive and silent for the entire approach. And the first indication that American aviation assets were present came in the form of a fire control lock at 18 miles. The aircraft they never saw, never detected, and never had any sensor indication of were the ones that had been tracking them since they taxied out. The Su-30MK-2S recovered to base. The second aircraft required an unscheduled engine inspection. The radar warning receiver data from both aircraft was downloaded and analyzed by Venezuelan Air Force intelligence, which confirmed the presence of AESA emitters with characteristics consistent with American carrier aviation, but found no launch platform intercept in either aircraft's radar records. The aircraft that locked them and initiated the engagement had been invisible to every sensor the Venezuelan jets carried. The Ford continued its flight operations. The incident logged as a completed rule of engagement event, requiring no further action. Normal air wing recovery was underway within 12 minutes of the Venezuelan aircraft's departure from the engagement zone. The strategic context that produced this confrontation will not resolve itself with a single engagement. Maduro's government will find another opportunity to attempt another demonstration of defiance, because the political pressure that generates the requirement for those demonstrations, the sustained U.S. counter-narcotics campaign, the economic sanctions, the isolation from international financial systems, is still fully in effect. The next attempt will be planned with the knowledge gained from this one, that the strike group's radar coverage extends further than their equipment suggested, that American carrier aviation assets were present and invisible during the approach, and that the warning shot was not a miss. The Venezuelan Air Force now has operational data demonstrating that their best current platforms, flown by experienced pilots in good weather at their preferred tactical profile, cannot penetrate the strike group's outer defense perimeter without encountering invisible fire control locks and missile employment before they are anywhere close to a position from which they could threaten the carrier. That data will inform future Caracas decisions about what military options are actually viable in this environment versus which ones produce political theater at unacceptable operational cost. The Ford strike group operates under the knowledge that Venezuela's military is a hollow challenge. The harder strategic question the engagement points toward is what the doctrine and technology calculus looks like when the adversary is not Venezuela, but a state that has invested seriously in countering exactly the networked architecture that made this outcome so one-sided. An adversary with genuine electronic warfare capability, genuine long-range strike systems, and genuine sensors capable of finding what the Venezuelan aircraft could not find. The calm that prevailed on the Ford's bridge after the Venezuelan aircraft turned south was the calm of people who understood that the engagement they had just completed was not the engagement the doctrine was built to handle. It was the easy version. The fact that it was easy is the deterrent. The fact that something harder exists somewhere beyond the horizon is the reason the training continues. Here is the question worth putting to anyone who watched this unfold. The entire engagement turned on one asymmetry. The American aircraft were invisible, and the Venezuelan aircraft were not. That asymmetry is a function of radar cross-section, emissions management, and a sensor-sharing network that allowed fire control locks to be achieved without the locking platform emitting anything the target could detect. Against an adversary whose electronic warfare capability is specifically optimized to detect and exploit the data links that make that network function, who can find the E2D, jam the link 16, or insert false data into the cooperative engagement picture? Does the invisible hunter model hold? And if it doesn't hold cleanly, where does the layered defense fall back to? Leave your analysis below.